Hey there. Welcome back. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that, might make some people uncomfortable, but it's important to talk about.
Sure.
Narcissism.
Right.
We're looking at this excerpt from the Narcissistic Abuse Network website.
Interesting.
And wow, this is not just like a surface level skim, you know?
Right.
This source goes deep into the impact of narcissism from like personal relationships to society to the economy even. It's one of those things that we often, I think, kind of joke about.
Yeah.
But the reality is much more serious.
It's true. I used to think of narcissism as just kind of like a personality quirk.
Right.
A little annoying maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But what this source does, it exposes the consequences.
Yeah.
And they go way beyond just someone being a bit self-centered.
I had a similar thought when I was reading this. I was like, wait a minute, this is actually a huge problem.
Yeah.
And get this. According to the source, narcissism is estimated to cost the U.S. economy nearly $2 million.
Wow.
Every single minute.
That number stopped me in my tracks, too, when you really think about it. That's over $1 trillion a year. It really highlights how this goes beyond just like individual behavior we're talking about, a systemic issue with a massive financial and social burden.
It's mind-blowing. And in the UK, it's a similar impact proportionally, about 44,000 pounds every minute. It really makes you wonder how we got here.
Yeah.
So before we get into that, I have to ask, have you ever just dismissed narcissism as just a personality quirk? They're just a bit full of themselves.
Oh, yeah, sure.
This source really challenges that.
Right. It pushes us to look beyond that surface level understanding and acknowledge the deeper aspects. And, it doesn't shy away from those. They share some verbally abusive phrases that are so commonly used by narcissists.
Yeah.
And they are really chilling to read.
Some of those phrases are just, wow, they're printed in big, bold letters, and they really give you a glimpse into the emotional abuse that often happens behind closed doors. Like, you're too sensitive, you're crazy. Things that are just meant to gaslight and manipulate the other person.
Right, yeah.
It's really disturbing.
And that's where the expertise of the Narcissistic Abuse Network comes in.
Yeah.
They recognize these phrases as part of larger patterns of abuse that can have devastating consequences for the victims.
Speaking of consequences, let's break down that financial cost a bit more.
Okay.
I was floored by these numbers. $1.92 million per minute. In the U.S., how do they even calculate a number like that?
Well, it's much broader than just lost productivity.
Right.
It includes things like healthcare costs associated with the physical and mental health impacts of abuse, as well as costs with legal proceedings, therapy, even social services.
Wow.
It's a complex calculation, but it really underscores the ripple effect of this issue. And sadly, it's not just a U.S. phenomenon.
Right.
That figure we mentioned for the UK, almost 44,000 pounds per minute, it's another stark reminder that this is a global problem.
Wow. It all kind of paints a bleak picture. But here's where things get interesting and maybe a little uncomfortable. The source argues that modern society actually encourages narcissistic traits.
Interesting.
It's almost like we're inadvertently creating a breeding ground for narcissism without even realizing it.
It's a provocative point, isn't it? They argue that constant pressure to self-promote, the pursuit of status and wealth, the way social media rewards superficiality, it all plays into this me-first mentality.
It's so true. Like, how many times have you scrolled through social media and you felt that pang of envy or inadequacy based on someone else's carefully curated online persona?
I know.
It's almost impossible to escape these days. I know I catch myself comparing myself to others way more often than I'd like to admit. Do you see this in your own life too?
Absolutely, I think. We're all susceptible to it, to some degree. It's really woven into our culture.
Yeah.
To be honest, I've definitely fallen into that trap of comparing myself to others online.
Right.
It's just something we all need to be mindful of.
Totally. So where does this lead us?
Well, the source argues it can have a huge impact on businesses and the economy as a whole.
Okay.
They highlight companies like Boeing and GE.
Interesting.
Companies that were once considered titans of industry whose downfalls have been linked to narcissistic leadership.
That part was really eye-opening. They point to CEOs like Jack Welch, who was celebrated as this like manager of the century at GE, but they go on to describe how he actually fostered this toxic work environment and prioritized short-term profits over long-term sustainability.
Right.
And it's a stark example of how this kind of leadership can ultimately lead to disaster.
It's a classic case of what happens when those narcissistic traits get into positions of power.
Right.
It becomes all about ego-driven decisions, a lack of accountability, a disregard for employees, even customers.
And the scary thing is that it's not just limited to these high-profile examples. It's happening at all levels of business and society.
Right.
I mean, think about the impact on employee morale, productivity, and innovation.
Right.
When you have a leader who is more focused on their own image than on the success of the team, it's just not sustainable.
And as the source points out, it's not just about those at the top. It's easy to point fingers at big corporations or high-profile CEOs, but this issue goes much deeper.
It's not just a them problem, it's an us problem.
Exactly. The source really encourages all of us to take a look in the mirror and examine our own choices and behaviors.
Okay, so we can't. We may not be able to change corporate culture or whatever, but we can start by changing ourselves.
Precisely.
Right.
It begs the question, do we prioritize material wealth over genuine connection, status over kindness? These are tough questions to ask ourselves, but the source really pushes us to confront those uncomfortable truths.
You know, it's funny. That whole personal responsibility thing can feel kind of daunting at first.
Sure.
But there's also something empowering about it. It's like we actually have the power to make different choices, to shift our priorities.
Absolutely. And that's where I think this concept of interdependence comes in, which the source highlights as a potential antidote to this wave of narcissism.
Ooh, tell me more about that. I'm not sure I fully grasp what they mean by interdependence.
Well, think of it as a shift away from that. Hyper-individualistic I, me, mine mindset.
Right.
The source argues that true fulfillment and lasting success, both personally and professionally, come from working collaboratively and focusing on the well-being of others.
Okay, so it's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. Instead of constantly trying to climb over each other to get to the top, we work together to create something better for everyone.
And there's actually a growing body of research that supports this idea. Studies have shown that people who prioritize cooperation and empathy over cutthroat competition actually experience greater well-being and ultimately achieve more. Think about it. When you help someone or contribute to a cause bigger than yourself, don't you get that warm, fuzzy feeling?
Oh, absolutely. It's so much more rewarding than just focusing on my own little bubble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about feeling good. It's about recognizing that our individual well-being is interconnected with the well-being of others.
So it's like a ripple effect. When we make a positive impact on someone's life, it can spread outwards and affect our families, our communities, maybe even the world. That's a powerful thought.
It is. And I think it's a much-needed counterpoint to the rampant narcissism we see in so many aspects of our culture today. So much of what we see online and in the media glorifies individual achievement and material success. It's easy to get caught up in that.
It definitely is a challenge. So knowing all of this, what does it mean for our listeners? What are the takeaways from this deep dive into narcissism?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that narcissism is much more than just a nuisance. It has tangible, far-reaching consequences for individuals, relationships, businesses, and society as a whole.
Right. It's a big deal. And it can feel overwhelming at times, especially given how prevalent it seems to be these days. But if I'm hearing you correctly, the good news is that we're not powerless.
Exactly. We can all make the choice to challenge narcissistic behavior, both in ourselves and in others. It starts with awareness and understanding, which I hope this deep dive has provided. Then it's about taking action, even if it's just small steps at first.
Okay, I like that. It's about focusing on what we can control, which is ourselves and our own actions.
Wisely. And as the source emphasizes, we can cultivate a more empathetic and collaborative way of being. Starting with our everyday choices and interactions, it's about asking ourselves, am I contributing to a culture of narcissism or am I working to create something better?
So instead of chasing that fleeting external validation, like likes on social media or the newest badges, it's about finding fulfillment, genuine connection, and contributing to the well-being of others.
It's about recognizing that true lasting success and fulfillment come from building genuine connections and contributing to something larger than ourselves, whether that's our family, our community, or our planet as a whole.
You know, as you're talking about this, I keep thinking back to that image the source used at the beginning. Those harsh, verbally abusive phrases printed in large font.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder of the pain and damage that narcissistic abuse can inflict on individuals and families.
It is a powerful reminder that this isn't just some abstract concept. It has real-world consequences for people's lives.
And it brings us back to that initial shock. Like, wait a minute, people actually say these things to their loved ones.
Yeah.
It's easy to just dismiss narcissism as just a personality flaw, but those phrases make it impossible to ignore the destructive nature of this behavior.
It really underscores the need for awareness and education, like you were saying. We need to be able to recognize those red flags and understand the serious consequences of narcissistic abuse, both for ourselves and for those around us.
And it's not just about protecting ourselves.
Right. It's also about supporting those who are being victimized.
So what can we do, like, to help someone who might be trapped in a relationship with a narcissist? I mean, it feels like such a delicate situation. Just navigate.
You're right. It's not about barging in with solutions, but the source really emphasizes the importance of just being there, listening without judgment, and offering support.
That makes sense. You know, I think sometimes people are afraid to speak up because they don't want to overstep or make things worse.
I understand that hesitation. But even small gestures can make a big difference. Just letting someone know that they're not alone can be so powerful.
So it's about creating a safe space for them to open up.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And connecting them with resources if they need them. Organizations like the Narcissistic Abuse Network, they provide valuable information. And support groups. That could be a lifeline for people who are struggling with this type of abuse.
It's like we're building a safety net.
That's a great way to put it. And as we become more aware of the signs of narcissistic abuse, we can also start to challenge those behaviors in a broader societal context.
So it's not just about helping individuals. It's about shifting those cultural norms that allow narcissism to thrive.
It's about holding abusers accountable and creating a culture of empathy and respect where that narcissistic behavior is no longer tolerated or even glamorized.
It's funny. We started this deep dive talking about the financial cost of narcissism, but as we've gone deeper, it's become so much more than that.
It really is. It's about the human cost,
the
emotional pain, the broken relationships, the erosion of trust and connection.
And it makes that closing line, the source, all the more urgent. In a world obsessed with I, me, mine, is it possible to shift towards a more empathetic, collaborative way of being?
It's a big question. And it might feel daunting. But the source doesn't just leave us hanging.
Right. They push us to consider what small step we can take today to move in that direction.
And I think that's where the real power lies. It's not about waiting for some grand societal shift. It's about each of us making a choice to choose kindness, to prioritize connection over competition, to challenge narcissistic behavior when we see it.
It's about remembering that we're all in this together, that our actions have an impact, and that even small acts of empathy and kindness can create a ripple effect of positive change.
That's what I find so hopeful about this source. Even in the face of something as pervasive and complex as narcissism, it reminds us that we have the power to create a better world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
What if, instead of feeling overwhelmed by the me, me, me mentality, we focused on fostering a culture of we?
What if instead of celebrating individual achievement at all costs, we celebrated collaboration and compassion? What if success was measured not by what we accumulate, but by the positive impact we have on others, on the world around us?
It's a world I want to live in.
Me too. And I think it's a world we can create one small step at a time.
So let's get started.